Hey, it's Sam, and I'm making this video after the sad attack, the terrorist bombing in Belgium on March 22nd in the morning, 8 a.m. local time. This is happening hours before the lunar eclipse. I've been speaking at great length about what this eclipse cycle is about. It's about governments, it's about world governments in relationship to each other, in relationship to things like immigration problems and logistics. I recently made a video update where I talked about how society and cultures are being transformed by the nuts and bolts, the logistics, and the literal workings of how we're handling our governments, how we're allocating resources and funds, how we're managing things like an immigration crisis. How do we organize the power of the kingdom? And organizing the power of the kingdom is a Virgo situation. The recent solar eclipse happened in Aquarius, which is about society, culture, and the people. And as I said in my recent update, Virgo, which is all of the details and delegation and managing those things, completely destroys and transforms the philosophy of the people. The people think it's this way, but then they see how everything is being managed and run and operated and delegated. And this includes things like banking systems, information, surveillance, the delegation of authority, allocation of resources. That is what really changes and transforms the awareness of the people. So this bombing happened at 8 a.m. March 22nd, and local time, Brussels time, that's an Aries ascendant, which is not surprising. Aries, bam, ruled by Mars, things blowing up, things exploding, very much a Mars quality. In addition, we have the ruler of Aries, Mars, in the 8th house from the ascendant. Now the ascendant is 17 degrees of Aries. Mars in the sky is 11 degrees of Scorpio. So right as that ascendant was moving in the 8th house from its ruler Mars, we had the explosion. Because it happened 8 a.m. Belgium time, 8 a.m. Brussels time makes for 17 degrees of Aries, but it was right around that time as the ascendant is moving, as the Earth is turning, that's lining up with Mars being in the 8th house almost to the exact degree from that Aries ascendant. Mars is also joined Saturn in Scorpio. So I've talked for months about this explosive potential of Mars-Saturn in Scorpio exploding and blowing up the icy surface of the world. Our fears that we're trying to hold and that we're trying to maintain, and to expect some explosiveness in your life and in the world since the end of February. So it's been about a month now, since February 21st. And again, that coincided with this eclipse cycle. We're finishing this eclipse cycle because it's finishing now that we're having this lunar eclipse. But it started about a month ago, right when Mars went into Scorpio, and I talked about it then, that we were opening up that sort of window of the eclipse. And it's closing on March 23rd when we have this lunar eclipse in Leo. Not surprising. This happened with Moon very close to Jupiter and Rahu. Jupiter retrograde and Rahu, they're still very close in Leo. The Moon was right in between them. Jupiter is 22 Leo. The Moon at the time was 24 Leo, and Rahu is 27 Leo. So the Moon is right in the middle of the eclipse point, or where the eclipse would happen. If this weren't a penumbral eclipse, which is a wide eclipse, this would have been right at the heart of the lunar eclipse, because it's right on top of Rahu. So the moon is right on Rahu hours before the actual eclipse. And as I said, this eclipse happens when the moon actually goes into Virgo. But you can see that once the moon lined up with Rahu, that's when we had this explosiveness. A couple other things of utmost importance to mention. This is the time when when Saturn and Jupiter are in an exact square in Western astrology, but this is Saturn planetary aspecting Jupiter to the exact degree. In Vedic astrology, aspects are much more specific. Jupiter does not square aspect in Vedic astrology. Jupiter only gives trines. Saturn gives a square. So right now, Saturn is in an exact, it's called the waning square, which is the 10th house aspect from Jupiter in Leo. So this means that Saturn in Scorpio is giving an exact 10th house aspect to Jupiter in Leo. And it's a one-way aspect. This isn't Jupiter and Saturn aspecting each other. That's not what's happening. Jupiter and Saturn only aspect each other when they're in opposition in Vedic astrology. Saturn is aspecting Jupiter one way. So Saturn, which is the planet of death, consequences, is putting a one-way aspect onto Jupiter, which is about hope, the big picture, things like religion and faith. This was a bombing from a religious fanatical religious group. That's very Jupiterian, and religious fanaticism is high now, as I've been saying for months, especially with Jupiter, Rahu, and Leo right now. So you have Jupiter, Rahu, and Leo, which we've had since early January. We have Saturn now in an exact aspect to Jupiter. It's also a very close aspect to Rahu. And the moon joins it. And again, it's in the sign of Leo, which is the sign of governments, power. And Rahu, which is explosiveness and things like fanaticism. And these fanatical, religious, fundamentalist ideologies exploding in the power centers of government and making a big noise in the world. And not surprising, the trigger transit happened when the moon moved into, the moon had just crossed that same 10th house aspect from Saturn. Very important to understand, one of the most important parts of this event as far as death, carnage, consequences, planning, strategizing, is the Saturn aspect. Because Saturn has been aspecting Jupiter and Rahu for a few days in this exact 10th house aspect. Saturn's aspect has been exact like this for a while, but the event didn't happen until the moon joined it. Bam! And the moon is the daily trigger. And so you can see when the moon joined and lined up and got right in between Jupiter and Rahu, passed right over that exact Saturn aspect, that's when the explosiveness happened. But it wasn't just then, it's then when Aries was the rising sign. So look at how many things have to add up. Those students out there, you should see that like everything in the chart shows this. It's like seen in like every way you can possibly look at it. So again, it wasn't just when the moon joined it. The moon had actually passed and been close to that degree for a few hours, but then we had the ascendant was Aquarius, not yet. The ascendant was Pisces, not yet. When the ascendant became Aries, then we're getting ready. This is when they were probably getting ready to go, okay, let's go, as far as a terrorist. Then as the ascendant gets closer to that like exact 8th house from Mars, or where Mars is in the 8th house from that ascendant, that's when the explosive event occurs. Now Mars is also aspecting Ketu and Venus in Aquarius. So this is why this particular eclipse axis, this particular Rahu-Ketu nodal axis, is explosive, because it's not just that you have Rahu-Jupiter in Leo, which is governments in the state, and Ketu just eclipsed the Sun in Aquarius, but you also have Mars aspecting that sign of Aquarius, and Ketu, and the solar eclipse that just occurred, and you have Saturn aspecting Leo with Jupiter and Rahu there. And look what happened. When all of that lined up, when the moon went there, bam. Now, the other thing that's relevant here is a few things. The moon was in Purva Falguni Nakshatra, and Purva Falguni is a nakshatra in Leo, and it's ruled by the god called Bhaga, or the god of delight, and where we can really delight in having power, but it's also where we can exploit and misuse power, misuse authority, particularly where governments get lazy and steal the money from the kingdom rather than sharing it. That's the deeper principle, or that's one of the main axes of karma with Purva Falguni Nakshatra, is the need to share and not hoard all of the wealth for the kingdom. And it's that idea that it's good to be the king, and we have wealth, and we have luxury, and we have privilege. And again, you see these terrorists hitting right in the heart of that idea, that concept. There's a story about the god Bhaga, which kind of illustrates part of this energy. You know, the things about nakshatras is their stories really bring a lot of their energy and their nature into existence. Bhaga was one of the gods that are called the Adityas. And the Adityas are the incarnations of the sun that were brought, or that were given to the earth for there to be prosperity and abundance. Gayatri, I should say the Gayatri mantra is a hymn to one of the Adityas called Savitur. There are other ones like Aryaman, who is the deity of Uttar Falguni, Bhaga, who is the deity of Purva Falguni, Mitra, who is the god of Anuradha, Vishwakarma. This section of the zodiac between Leo and Scorpio is populated with many of the Adityas. And this section of the zodiac is about manifesting our life, a manifest solid life on earth. And this Aditya, who is about an abundant life on earth, and again, it's in Leo, and it's about the enjoyment. It's good to be king and to enjoy life, but we need to share the wealth of the kingdom. There was an event that happened with Lord Shiva and his first wife Sati, where her father performed a ritual, a sacrifice, or a homa, a fire ceremony. And Sati, Lord Shiva's wife, this husband of Sati didn't like Lord Shiva. He didn't like that his wife Sati had married Shiva, who was unkempt and living on the mountain and with snakes around his neck and very improper. So he had this yagya, or the sacrifice, and didn't invite Shiva, and also didn't invite Sati. But she came anyway. She sort of crashed the party and heard Daksha, who was her father, his name was Daksha, speaking badly about Shiva at the sacrifice. And she was so disgraced by it, and she felt so disgraced and angry and humiliated that she immolated herself. She threw herself on the sacred fire and burned herself. One of the gods that was at that sacrifice was Bhaga. There was a lot of the Adityas who were there. And at some point, while Daksha was insulting Lord Shiva, Bhaga winked, like this little sort of conspiratorial wink. that you see politicians with a kind of, like a little sort of wink and a nod. They're like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, we're definitely going to take care of that too. Once elected, I'm going to make sure, and, there's a chicken in every pot. And yeah, that little wink, like, yeah, right. It's that kind of energy where power tries to take care of itself and circle the wagons around the trappings of power, which is the way our world really operates now. These lower qualities of Purva Falguni and stealing from the kingdom rather than being generous with the wealth is really a big part of what we're all going through and what we're seeing playing out on the global scale. So back to the story. After Shiva's wife, Sati, immolated herself on the fire, Shiva found out and was just beside himself with grief and then anger. And then he went to the yagya, to the fire ceremony, and started to exact revenge. And each one of the gods who were there got paid back for their violation. And Bugha, the god who winked, had his eyes poked out to teach him not to be like that. There was a god Pushan who smiled, and he had his teeth knocked out. So this is why Pushan is called, it's said that he's toothless. So these are symbols of the nakshatras that are very deep in understanding their usage. So this quality of Purva Falguni is really important because that's where the moon is. The moon could have been in Uttara Falguni, it could have been in Magha, two other nakshatras in Leo, but it was in Purva Falguni, which is this kind of energy. It's this quality of Leo. And by the way, this is something that those of us who use sidereal zodiac for rashis and nakshatras, this is one of the main reasons. It's just impossible to really, once you understand each nakshatra and how it functions within each rashi, this is that part of Leo. No question. You see it over and over again. And you see it in this example of this act of terror and these marginalized people, these Islamic terrorists. They use terror because they don't have aircraft, they don't have tanks to fly. What they have is the potential to strike the power center of a city with a bomber, with a suicide bomber. So this is the power they have to exact revenge on what they see as this Western culture and this Western world that's kind of been like, oh yeah, we'll come and we'll take care of the Muslims, we'll take their oil and run out, and we'll take care of you, This is that kind of cynicism and like revenge for that kind of idea from their point of view or whatever. And again, this is something these planets, especially Jupiter, is now in Purva Falguni. Rahu is still in Uttar Falguni. It's still in the one after. It's about to go into Purva Falguni as well. But this is also a big part of that energy. So, of course, all of our hearts go out to these souls. God rest their soul. Terrible thing to have happen in our world. And, those eclipses are for real. We have intense volatility, and of course it's along this Leo-Aquarius axis, governments, culture. I've been saying for months. I know in other systems it's Pisces and Virgo. Not the way I've seen it, not the way I've been interpreting it for months. And like I've been saying since the end of last year, it's going to bring into contrast government, culture, and all of the things that we're seeing that are prominent and dominant themes in the world right now. And so, I hope you stay safe, and we say a prayer for everyone in Belgium and around the world who mourn such senseless acts.
Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardhanam उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनात् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात् त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनात् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात् त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनात् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात्